They surrounded the wedding arch like nothing was wrong, champagne in hand, smiling for pictures. But I knew better. I didn't come here for cake or closure. I came because I overheard one word in a language only ghosts and operatives still speak. Rostov Russian, low and tight, slipped from the groom's mouth to his father's ear. She suspects nothing. Deliver the package after the ceremony. I didn't blink. I didn't panic. I just tapped my earring, an old habit masking an old device, and whispered, Perseus. That was all it took. A name buried in classified protocol. A signal meant for ears still loyal to truth. 63 minutes later, the garden bloomed with agents. Vanessa, my sister, watched her groom get cuffed mid-toast. Her lips trembled. Mine didn't. I hadn't come to save her. I'd come to end something that started long before she picked out flower arrangements. And when the cuffs clicked shut, she knew. I wasn't the forgotten sister anymore. I was the reckoning they never saw coming. It was exactly 24 hours earlier when the first alarm bell went off, not in my head, but in my gut. I was sanding down the edge of a wooden bench in my garage, something I'd been working on for months. My hands were coated in fine dust, my mind empty until I stepped outside for air and spotted the envelope. Cream-colored, heavyweight, perfumed. I didn't need to flip it over. Only one person still scented her mail, my sister Vanessa. The wedding invitation was tucked inside like a warning in disguise. Her handwriting was elegant, flawless, and underneath the formal calligraphy was a smaller note from our mother. You don't have to come if it's too hard, but if you do, please no military talk. Let your sister have her day. I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. I simply stood there with it in my hands, letting the irony burn slow and deep. They weren't worried I'd make a scene. They were worried I'd remind people I still existed. That night, I packed light. A plain black dress, low heels, my old dog tags, though I'd never wear them, and a small matte black box military issue. Inside was a device no bigger than a thumbtack, an earpiece I hadn't used since Kramnik collapsed in the Baltic corridor. It was a relic, but fully functional, and I trusted it more than I trusted anyone whose name was printed on that invitation. I RSVP'd alone. I arrived at the rehearsal dinner just as dusk painted the estate in gold. From the moment I stepped through the archway, the air changed. People fell silent for a beat too long, then scrambled to fill the gap with exaggerated laughter and clinking glasses. I didn't need to be told I wasn't welcome. I could smell it in the way no one made eye contact for more than 2 seconds. Vanessa was holding court at the center of the room, radiant in blush silk and a smile that looked Botoxed into place. When she spotted me, the smile faltered just for a split second. Then she turned to her group and said, "This is my sister Evelyn. She used to be in the military. Now she's into gardening or something." They laughed not because it was funny, but because they were supposed to. I nodded once and took my place at the far end of the long dinner table. No name card, just an extra chair placed just in case. It wobbled on the uneven patio stone. I sat anyway. Dinner was a performance. Polished toasts, exaggerated love stories, curated memories of how Vanessa and her fiancé, Alexander, had met. Not a single detail about his background, though, just vague references. Brilliant investor, international connections, charming as hell. Not one guest could name where he grew up. Not one could explain how someone who didn't exist 5 years ago now owned 2 island properties and a Gulf Stream. But I'd seen his type before, slick, refined, calculated. His father, Mikhailov, was harder to ignore. A thick man with a silver beard and a stillness that made my spine itch. He said little, but his eyes scanned every inch of the table like he was logging coordinates. At one point, a server refilled my water. As I reached for the glass, I caught the glint of something around Alexander's neck, a pendant thick matte and slightly curved. Not jewelry, not vanity, a drive. A secure data capsule with encryption protocols I hadn't seen since the Kinov raids. I didn't flinch. I didn't give them anything. But I knew. I knew I was looking at a ghost from my past dressed in a tuxedo. That night I didn't sleep. I sat by the window of the guest room, listening to the wind rattle the hedges and the occasional pop of champagne corks from the garden below. I replayed every classified briefing I'd ever sat through about ghost networks, shell companies, dark data vaults. I thought about Kinov, about the man they called Spectre, about the file they'd buried under 5 levels of clearance. I thought about the fact that Vanessa, my sister, the same one who once begged me to braid her hair for 5th grade picture day, was about to marry someone at the center of all of it. By dawn, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to stop the wedding. I wasn't going to argue with my family. I was just going to listen quietly, completely, and act only if the threat became undeniable. The next morning at brunch, Alexander leaned over Vanessa and reached for the mimosa pitcher. That's when I saw the drive again, swinging slightly from his neck, catching a single ray of sunlight like a signal flare. The design was unmistakable. Same model we recovered from an arms trafficker in Kramnik. Location triggered, triple-shelled anti-tamper encryption. It didn't store vacation pictures. It carried leverage. I excused myself, claimed I had a work call, and returned to my room. From the bottom of my bag, I pulled out a photo I'd kept for 5 years, a grainy still from a surveillance cam. The man's face half obscured by fog, but the silhouette matched. The pendant matched, and now the timeline matched. That was the turning point. The exact moment I stopped being a guest at my sister's wedding and became something else entirely. I wasn't just attending, I was investigating. The family brunch dissolved into polite chaos, flutes of rosé white linen staged laughter. From across the room, Alexander toasted with an elderly guest as if he didn't have decades of secrets coiled around his neck. But I wasn't watching him anymore. I was listening. The earpiece nestled in my right ear hummed with low calibration. I tapped my earring again, more of a habit than necessity, and whispered a test word alive. The system confirmed in silent vibration. Connection was good. I was online. No one noticed me slipping out of the brunch. They rarely did. I walked the perimeter of the garden, slow measured. Just another awkward relative taking air. Near the caterer's tent, I paused, letting the breeze carry conversations toward me. And then it came. Low-hushed Russian. But not the tourist kind. This was clipped, coded, intentional. I caught fragments. She knows nothing. Move at midnight, diversion prepared. The same cadence I'd heard in black site interrogations, always before a drop. A betrayal or a bomb. Alexander's voice, and Mikhailov's. I closed my eyes, memorizing the pattern. I didn't need to hear more. I had heard enough. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't some soldier's twitch from too many years behind encrypted walls. This was operational language in a civilian zone at a wedding. I returned to the guest room without speaking to anyone. Locked the door, sat on the floor, legs crossed, hands steady. In my head, I ran through scenarios, code movements, tactical signals, cross-border data, laundering anything that matched, deliver the package after the ceremony. There were too many overlaps, too many precedents. I had to act. I reached into the black case. The second switch clicked beneath my fingertip, opening the secure channel. I whispered, confirming chatter. Code flag, level 3. Eyes on groom and father. Possible handoff post-ceremony. Will signal on activation. There was a pause. Then the faintest click. Acknowledged. No questions, no hesitation. They still trusted me. I stood, brushed the wrinkles from my blazer, and returned to the reception as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Vanessa greeted me near the bar, cheeks flushed from champagne and sunlight. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said playfully. I smiled back just slightly. Maybe I have. The ceremony began just before sunset. Rows of chairs, aisle of petals, string quartet in full swoon. Vanessa floated down the aisle like royalty. Alexander stood at the altar, composed, charming. But my eyes never left his hands. They held hers too tightly. As they said their vows, I shifted near the back row, positioning myself in line with the floral arch, maximum visibility, minimum exposure. No one looked twice. I was still the invisible sister, the one who didn't fit the color palette. During the second toast, as planned, I slipped out, circled behind the estate, found the wrought iron statue where signal was strongest, and I whispered the word, Perseus. It barely made a sound, but across time zones and encrypted frequencies, it was heard. Not by civilians, not by wedding guests, but by those who still knew the stakes, who still listened when the rest of the world danced. Back inside the tent, I sipped sparkling cider. Alexander laughed with a cousin. His father checked his watch just once. Vanessa adjusted her veil and beamed. They had no idea the storm was already inbound. Exactly 63 minutes later, I saw it. Reflected in the polished glass of the bar, the first black SUV unmarked, then a second, then a third. No sirens, no lights, just momentum. This wasn't theater. It was real. Agents entered through 3 access points: service entrance, Southgate Garden Wall. Interpol, Homeland, tactical intelligence units, each dressed like a guest, calm and forgettable. But I saw the earpieces, the formation, the precision. Alexander didn't notice at first. He was too busy charming Vanessa's old college roommate. But when the third agent stepped past the cake table, the tension in his jaw gave him away. He knew. I turned away, moved toward the edge of the tent. That's when the command crackled in my ear. Perseus confirmed. Units in position. Green light. I didn't smile, but my spine straightened. The arrest wasn't loud. It never is. One agent approached Alexander, shook his hand like a friend. Another spoke softly to Mikhailov, nodded toward the valet area. Then came the signal, quick practiced. Hands behind the back, cuffs out of view. Until Vanessa screamed. No, what are you doing? The entire reception froze. Champagne spilled. Phones flew up. A groomsman fainted. The band stopped mid-song. Mikhailov was already on the ground. Alexander tried to resist twisting toward Vanessa, but 3 agents pinned him fast. They read the charges. Espionage, cyber terrorism, illicit data trafficking. Vanessa's mouth fell open. Her veil slipped. Her knees buckled. She turned to me wide-eyed. You did this. I didn't answer. She didn't need one. Around us, 3 more guests were quietly detained, all tied to shell companies flagged by Interpol. All had been smiling minutes earlier. Now they were silent. Justice had arrived, and it didn't care about flower arrangements. The silence after a takedown is never empty. It's saturated with disbelief, with questions, with betrayal rippling through every eye in the room. But I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel vindication either. I felt gravity, the kind that anchors your spine when your past finally collides with the present and there's no version of you left untouched. Vanessa sat by the edge of the fountain, her dress bunched around her knees, mascara bleeding into the fabric. She wasn't crying for Alexander. Not really. She was unraveling. She was watching the narrative she'd constructed, perfect husband dream wedding, golden future splinter into headlines and handcuffs. Her world had collapsed in front of influencers and family alike, and all she had left was the sister she once told to stay invisible. She looked at me like I was the bomb, not the shield. I trusted you, she choked. No, I replied quietly, stepping closer. You tolerated me. There's a difference. For the first time, her face cracked, not with anger, but understanding. A recognition years in the making. The woman she had mocked was the one who had saved her from becoming collateral damage. But even then, I didn't expect thanks. I knew better. Later in the fading light, my father found me by the gravel path behind the reception tent. The chaos was still settling, agents gathering evidence, guests being escorted to waiting cars, cameras flashing like judgment. He walked slowly, shoulders hunched, not from age, but from something heavier, regret. You knew before the wedding, he said. I did, I confirmed. How long before that? I hesitated, since I saw his face in the Kramnik file. He nodded just once, his lips pressing together like he wanted to say more, but couldn't find the words. That nod was the closest I'd ever get to his approval. And for once, it was enough. But my mother wasn't as gracious. She appeared seconds later, still in her champagne-colored dress, now stained at the hem. Her expression was molten. You ruined it, she hissed. Her only wedding, her one perfect day. I looked her straight in the eye. He was a criminal. You could have waited, she snapped. 1 more hour, 1 day. I didn't reply. She wasn't looking for truth. She wanted performance, obedience, complicity. She trusted you, she added. No, I said again. She didn't. She trusted the silence. My father put a hand on her arm, gently pulling her back. She resisted for a moment, then let him guide her away, still fuming. He turned to me one last time and whispered, She'll hate you for this. I can live with that, I said, and I meant it. Because in that moment, I understood something I'd been resisting for years. I had never belonged in this family. Not really. I was the uncomfortable reminder that truth doesn't always wear makeup and sit nicely at the dinner table. I was the shadow they kept in the background of family photos, the one who'd seen too much, said too little, and carried the weight for everyone. And now, by exposing Alexander, I had ripped the mask off more than just a man. I had exposed the illusion my family had been clinging to for decades. Later that night, back at the hotel, I opened my phone and saw the live stream clip one of Vanessa's influencer friends had caught everything. The helicopters, the takedown, the guests screaming. The frame caught me too, lifting my hand to my earring just before it all unfolded. Zoomed in. Frozen. Captioned, she knew. Within hours, the internet turned me into a meme. Some called me a hero. Most called me a freak. Headlines read, Spy Sister Rex. Wedding couldn't she wait till the cake. It didn't matter. Because tucked among the noise, something real began to stir. Leaked intelligence logs. Redacted photos. Old aliases connected to Alexander and Mikhailov. And in one of the blurred images, my back was turned face-shadowed, but I was there. a ghost who had finally stepped into the light. I didn't respond to the articles. I didn't issue a statement. I didn't need to. The work was already done. 2 weeks later, a cream-colored envelope arrived with no return address. Inside, just one folded page lined notebook paper written in Vanessa's hand. Olivia, I was wrong about you. And more importantly, I was wrong about myself. I don't know what else to say, but I needed you to know that. V? No plea for forgiveness, no conditions, just a fragile sentence left trembling in ink. I read it once, then again. And then I folded it neatly, slid it into the iron box I kept at the back of my closet next to my old ID, a mission map, and the cassette I'd carried through 3 countries. It didn't heal everything, but it proved something had changed. Because for the first time, my sister saw me not as a warning, not as a mistake, but as a woman who stood when no one else would. Who didn't ruin the wedding. Who saved her from it. I used to think opportunities came in the form of medals or contracts, something earned, something clear. But sometimes the real ones arrive quietly tucked between the end of a disaster and the start of something smaller, softer. I stayed in the hotel for 3 more nights. Not out of fear or avoidance, but to feel the silence. To let the world process what had happened without chasing it. I walked the hallways when no one else did. I sipped ginger tea instead of bourbon. I kept my phone off. And I listened. By the 4th morning, I walked to the small cafe across the street, the kind with cracked tile and a bell above the door that rang like nostalgia. I ordered eggs and toast. No one looked at me. No one whispered. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying a nameplate or a call sign, just a bruised, unassuming face in a corner booth. The owner, a short woman in her 70s, refilled my coffee and said gently, "You're her, aren't you?" I didn't flinch. Depends on who her is. She smiled, the one who stopped pretending. Then she walked away. And that's when it hit me. I didn't need redemption. I didn't need applause. I needed release. Back home, I didn't unpack right away. I didn't scrub the mission clean or box it away like I'd done 100 times before. Instead, I walked into the garden behind my cabin and just stood there. Bare hands, bare truth. The weeds had overgrown the herbs uneven. But it was mine. And for the first time, I didn't see it as a symbol of retreat. I saw it as something waiting to be rebuilt. So I got to work, not with weapons or algorithms, but with seeds. I planted basil and lavender, tomatoes and sage. Something in me softened, not out of weakness, but out of the weariness that comes after a battle well fought. I let the dirt stain my nails, let the sun bake my neck. I played Miles Davis on vinyl and let the music bleed into the soil. And slowly I started breathing differently. A week later, I got a letter not from Vanessa, but from someone else. A contact from an old joint op team. It wasn't an offer, not exactly. More of a question, a whisper. We're building something new. Quiet, off-book, field-tested minds. You in. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I sat with the idea like I used to sit with encrypted files, letting it circle, watching its angles. Not because I doubted them, because I needed to be sure it wasn't about revenge or proving myself. I'd done that already. This would be different. This would be a role built not around trust, but capability. No ceremony, no rank, just precision, just impact. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to beg to be included. I still hadn't said yes by the time I opened the iron box again. My hand hovered over Vanessa's note, my old ID, the map from Kinov. Each piece was a chapter, each scar a signature. I took out the note, read it one last time. Then I placed it back, but this time I added something new, a photo from the wedding. One of the few that hadn't been deleted or scrubbed by the press. It showed Vanessa not crying, not broken, but holding a flute of champagne, smiling at someone off camera. The exact moment before everything shattered. I slid it behind the letter and closed the lid, because this time the mission wasn't about cleaning up someone else's mess. It was about starting on my own terms. The next morning, I responded to the inquiry, "I'm listening." Not committing, not diving in headfirst, just opening the channel. And that's all I ever needed, an open line, a real seat at the table, and the choice to say yes or no. That's the opportunity no one gave me when I came home from war. The one my family never understood. They wanted me invisible, silent, safe. What they didn't see was that I could be all 3 and still be dangerous. Now I wasn't chasing validation, I was rebuilding agency, and that in itself was freedom. There's a moment after every mission, military or personal, where you look in the mirror and wonder who exactly walked out of the fire. Not who went in. That person's gone. Burned down. reforged. I saw her again one quiet afternoon while pruning the lemon balm that refused to behave. Sunlight caught the reflection in the kitchen window, and there I was stronger, still quieter than before, but not broken, not erased. It wasn't the kind of transformation they make movies about. There was no swelling music, no teary reunion. My family didn't magically change overnight. Vanessa hadn't sent another letter. My mother hadn't picked up the phone. My father had only offered me a nod, a gesture with more weight than 100 apologies. But I had changed. For the first time in over a decade, I wasn't waiting to be called. I wasn't holding my breath for someone to hand me a purpose. I made my own. Every decision, from how I stirred my tea to when I read Vanessa's note again, became intentional. Not reactive, not defensive, just real. I started volunteering at a local literacy center under an alias. No one asked about Kinov or command structures or tactical extraction plans. They asked about sentence flow, about poetry. I helped veterans write resumes and coached a teenager through a college entrance essay about courage. He didn't know what I'd done, didn't need to. That anonymity gave me more peace than any medal ever had. Evenings became sacred. Jazz low in the background kettle on the stove, fingers stained with soil and ink. I stopped checking headlines. I stopped needing to defend myself to strangers who only knew one frame of a viral video. I began to heal in ways I didn't know I still needed. I started running again, slow, not like I used to back when my body was trained for speed and pain thresholds. Now I ran to clear space in my head to breathe out memories that used to wake me up at 3 a.m., soaked in sweat. Kinov still came back sometimes in dreams and flashes, but it didn't own me anymore. One night I passed a man outside the farmer's market struggling to lift his wife from a wheelchair curb snag. I stepped in without thinking, lifting from behind steady shore. He looked up to thank me and blinked. You're the one from the wedding, right? I held his gaze. Yes. He didn't flinch. He nodded like it explained something about the way I moved, the way I positioned myself between his wife and the street. You're not what I expected, he said. Neither was the wedding, I replied. We both laughed. Not the awkward kind, the knowing kind. And then he said something I'd never forget. Most people just look away. You didn't. That stuck with me. Because for so long, I thought I had become invisible by accident, forgotten, dismissed, sidelined. But maybe I had chosen it too. Maybe I thought it was safer in the shadows. Maybe part of me had been waiting for permission to step forward again. Now I wasn't waiting. I signed up for a woodworking class at the local community center. Not to impress anyone, not even to finish the bench I'd abandoned in my garage. I did it to learn to shape something with my hands that didn't involve risk analysis or covert maneuvers. Just wood, just weight, just structure. It was there I met Jonah, former firefighter, now a sculptor with burns along his left arm, and stories he didn't force into conversations. We didn't talk much at first. We didn't need to. We both knew what it felt like to walk out of wreckage carrying parts no one could see. He never asked what I did before, just watched how I sanded edges too carefully like I was diffusing a bomb. Eventually, he said, you don't have to make it perfect. Just make it solid. That became our mantra, make it solid. And slowly, without expectation or urgency, something else grew between us. Not a romance made for screenplays, but a companionship rooted in respect and silence. In choosing each other without demanding pieces we weren't ready to give. Vanessa's name didn't come up, not at first. And when it did, I didn't flinch. I told him what I could, enough to make him understand why I listened so hard to the spaces between words. He said, you did the right thing. I believed him. Not because I needed affirmation, but because it felt like truth when he said it. Calm, simple, unshaken. Character growth doesn't come in a flash. It comes in the way you show up when no one's watching, in how you respond when someone needs help, and you move instinctively not for recognition, but because that's who you've become. I had spent my whole life listening for threats. Now I was listening for possibility, and it was everywhere. There's a kind of power in walking away not out of defeat, but because you've finally understood what staying costs. For years, I believed my silence was strength, that staying in the shadows meant I could protect others from the truths that shaped me. But now I know better. Silence isn't always noble. Sometimes it's a prison you decorate with honor. The day I closed the iron box, slipping Vanessa's letter alongside my old ID and the weathered Kinov map, I didn't feel closure. I felt clarity. Not everything had healed. Not everyone had changed. But I had. And that made all the difference. Vanessa and I didn't reconcile in some grand emotional reunion. There were no airport hugs, no dramatic phone calls. But she sent flowers to my porch 2 months later. No card, just dahlias, her favorite. That was enough. A quiet olive branch from a woman who once couldn't look me in the eye without flinching. My father sent a book. On Intelligence by Michael Herman. Inside a note in his neat engineer's handwriting, you were right to act. Proud doesn't always look like applause. I read it twice. Then again. Then I cried for the first time in years. Not because I was sad, but because I finally felt seen by the man whose approval I once chased like air. And my mother. She didn't say much. She sent a recipe, her famous lemon tea cookies. I don't bake, I never have. But I made them anyway, burned the first batch, nailed the second, then packed half into a tin and dropped them off at the local VA center. That's how healing begins, not with apologies, but with gestures. Small, quiet human. The internet moved on as it always does. My name fell off the trending list. New scandals took its place. The video clip of me at the wedding got buried beneath filters, dance trends, and conspiracy theories. But every now and then, someone still recognizes me. At the grocery store, the gas station, once in the library. They never ask for selfies. They ask questions like, was it real, or would you do it again? And my answer always is the same yes, without hesitation. Because it wasn't about glory. It was about choosing to act when no one else would. About believing that truth, however inconvenient, is still worth protecting. These days, I write more. Not for public eyes. For me, short stories, reflections, letters I'll never send. I keep them in a leather notebook with frayed corners right next to the bench Jonah helped me finish. Sometimes I read them aloud under the stars, just to feel what it's like to be heard without interruption. And when the world gets loud again, when the past claws at the edges of my mind, I go back to the garden. I let my hands dig into the dirt. I whisper old field names to the wind like prayers. I hum along to Coltrane and remind myself that survival is not the same as living. Living means building something after the storm. It means finding joy not in the absence of pain, but in the return of peace. I don't know if Vanessa will ever fully understand what I did that day. Maybe she's not ready. Maybe she never will be. But I don't need her to, because what matters is that I did it anyway. Not for validation, for justice, for safety, for the kind of truth that doesn't need a microphone, it just needs a witness. And I was that witness. I didn't stop the wedding to make a scene. I stopped it because someone had to. Because the whispers of danger never lie. Because ghosts don't always haunt, they sometimes protect. And because once long ago, in a freezing hallway in Kiev, a man called me Oliva and thought I would disappear. But I didn't. I returned not for revenge, but to close a loop, to seal a chapter, to make sure no other woman, sister, daughter would marry into a lie she couldn't see. My name is Evelyn Ward. I served in silence, I fought in shadows, and now I bloom in the light. Not because the world finally allowed me to, but because I claimed it. And that after all the betrayals, all the scars, all the dismissals, is the greatest victory I'll ever own. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is speak when everyone else expects you to stay silent. It's not easy being the truth teller, the one who interrupts the party, who breaks the illusion, who says, this isn't right. But silence, when weaponized, becomes complicity. And complicity has never protected anyone. Evelyn didn't seek revenge. She sought clarity. She knew that justice doesn't always wear a badge or arrive on time. It arrives when someone chooses to stop pretending. Her story teaches us that courage is rarely loud. It's the steady hand, the sharp eye, the refusal to look away when danger hides behind charm. She wasn't the villain, though many labeled her as such. She was the firewall, the one who acted when no one else would. And sometimes the person they least expect becomes the one who saves them all. Maybe you're not an ex-intelligence officer. Maybe your mission doesn't involve code names or encrypted drives. But chances are you've been in a room where something felt wrong, where someone laughed a little too hard, or where the truth trembled beneath forced smiles. Don't dismiss that instinct. Don't silence the voice that says, this doesn't add up. Whether it's calling out injustice at work, standing up for someone being mistreated, or simply asking the hard questions at the right time, your voice matters. It always has. You don't need a uniform or a clearance level to do the right thing. You just need the courage to act. And like Evelyn, you may never get applause, but you will know deep down that you chose honor over comfort. And that choice, it changes everything.